From 10,000-year-old brutal murders to the squabbling antics of DC and the attack on the forensic sciences, I'm Detective Zack Foxen, and you're listening to Forensic Geek Radio. The Discovery series The Killing Fields debuted earlier this month and is another real-life crime series following the investigation of a long, cold murder investigation. With an Oscar award-winning director and Emmy award-winning producer, the series follows two generations of detectives investigating the 1997 murder of a Louisiana woman, Eugene Beausefontaine. We're going to call her Eugene for the rest of this episode. Following the since-retired detective Rodi Sanchez, who originally investigated the case in 1997, and partnered with the new detective Aubrey St. Angelo, the show, acclaimed to be an active homicide investigation in real time, follows up on new leads identifying a potential suspect, even within the first episode. And this brings us to an interesting twist this week. The series identified Louisiana serial killer Derek Lee Todd, who up until this week had been sitting on death row for the murder of two women. Todd supposedly knew the victim of the Discovery series and fished on the same docks in which her body was located, all of which was highlighted within the premiere episode of the show earlier this month. According to a spokeswoman for the Louisiana Department of Corrections, Todd suffered a medical emergency and died Thursday evening. Needless to say, the show ended on its premiere episode with the Killing Fields DNA testing showing that Todd's DNA was not a match to the undergarment evidence of the victim. In an effort to alleviate the backlog of sexual assault kits requiring testing, new legislation has been introduced into the House in Washington. House Bill 2530, being deemed the stripper tax, is seeking to initiate, or one should say perhaps instate, a $4 tax to patrons attending adult clubs. The funds allocated by the tax would be used to outsource testing of rape kits to private labs. The bill claims that there's a strong link and tie between sexual assaults and the adult entertainment industry, in that victims of human trafficking at times end up in the adult industry. This bill, however, is not without critics in the House. Senator Rivers, who is a rape survivor herself, does not support the tax, stating that kit testing should be a budgetary priority of the government. An interesting lawsuit has been filed against the New York Police Department by the news network NY1, a subsidiary of Time Warner. The suit alleges that the NYPD's price of which they billed the news agency for providing footage from body cams is too steep. So what's that magic number? $36,000. NY1 had requested approximately 190 hours of footage from officer-worn body cams under the state's Freedom of Information Act. According to the New York Police Department, the $36,000 invoice is simply the cost of reviewing the footage, making necessary redactions, and then copying the edited footage to a provided format, specifying that they have to have an officer review the 190 hours worth of footage and then 114 hours of copying that footage at a rate of $120 an hour. It is unknown where the NYPD derived the $120 an hour, and I think it is quite amusing and brilliant on part of the NYPD for firing back at the media organization. The cost is not just paying for the officer, but probably for the maintenance of and cost and upkeep of machines that have to be taken into consideration. Otherwise, it's the taxpayers paying for the media's exploitation of footage. This is not exactly the topic I thought we would get a chance to talk about when we discussed body cams a few episodes ago, but I do think it's a great point. Do you think it's fair? Let me know on Facebook. Fossil remains out of East Africa may shed light on the age of organized warfare. Anthropologists from the University of Cambridge have unearthed 12 skeletons at an archaeological site at Nataruk, which is a site near Kenya's Lake Turkana. The remains indicate that they were the victim of a raid on a village at that lake between 9,500 and 10,500 years ago. The findings go toward an ongoing debate of whether warfare is let me try that one more time. The findings go towards the ongoing debate of whether warfare is as ancient as humanity or a more relative and recent concept. During that time period, Lake Turkana was a large source of food and water in the area and may have served as a reason for conflict between hunter-gatherer groups. Of the 12 skeletal remains, 10 showed evidence of lethal wounds by means of arrowhead wounds to the head and neck, bludgeoning by club-like instruments, as well as evidence of being bound and placed before death amongst their peers. Their arrowheads used in the attack were made of obsidian, which is actually kind of rare in that area, indicating that the attackers were probably from a different area. According to the science report in the journal Nature, this is the earliest findings on an act of warfare within the human culture. Impression evidence examination is once again under legal scrutiny, specifically firearms identification. In an appeals opinion by Associate Judge Catherine Easterly of the D.C. Court of Appeals, Easterly bastardizes the applied science, authoring that the discipline lacks a scientific basis and should be barred from criminal trials. Easterly's narrative was only a concurring opinion and thus carries no case law backing, but words still hurt. The appeal was of that of Marlon Williams, who is currently incarcerated for murder, and the appeal specifically chastised the testimony of the firearms expert who testified during the criminal trial. During the course of the testimony, the D.C. firearms examiner stated, "Those markings are unique to that gun and that gun only. Item number 58 fired these 3 bullets." Naturally, the district attorney's office stated that the testimony was regrettable, with absolutes and claims to 100% scientific certainty having no place within scientific testimony. Even DNA gives odds of 1 in so many quintillions. Easterly, who is formerly a public defender, cited that there is no statistical basis to determine how often bullets fired by weapons might look alike, or even whether a firearm makes a unique, reproducible mark. The critique to the forensic discipline comes at a time when impression and pattern evidence examination is under fire, with only in the past 6 months bite mark, hair analysis, and burn pattern examination techniques being questioned. While I agree with the subjectivity of bite mark analysis, I do think that firearms and fire investigations are different in that there are stringent policies in place, and if done correctly, examinations are of a science. As for now, I definitely foresee the need for more statistical studies in the pattern sciences to obfuscate the claims of pseudosciences by the far left. And here's where I start to get frustrated, and is a prime example of why I don't watch news or talking heads on the TVs. Is that ironic because I host a news show? But how about this? As opposed to being a constant damnizing critic of the forensic sciences and saying that they just don't meet par, think of this. Forensic science was not birthed from a scientist. It was birthed from a detective in a closet with a microscope. So as opposed to constantly saying that what we do is not quality and we're doing it wrong, be a proponent of showing how we can do it right. What standards and practices can we implement, such as those recommended by the NAS report? You know, it chastised a lot of disciplines, and it seems like everyone I talked to here recently constantly is saying that it was a bad mark on us. However, it shed some good light. DNA had very little discussion within that particular report and can lead as an example. Remember, we can't just prosecute and fix the criminal justice system that we have. 10,500 years ago, there was a group of hunters and gatherers who were raided and bludgeoned to death and caught arrows in the neck and bound and tortured. And here we are, 1,400 years ago. No, that's not right. My math is horrible. 2,500 years ago? Wow, I'm not a mathematician at all. Anyways, here we are in the 21st century, thousands and thousands of years later, we have developed a little bit more than hunting and gathering, but hey, here's a little story. We still have violence in our culture, and while that may be one of a philosophy question of whether or not that's just a human trait, it's something we ultimately have to deal with, and we should all come together to figure out how we can apply the scientific practices that we use today in the best manner to combat that issue, to make the world not only a safer place, but a better place. You know, I had the chance and the opportunity this week to teach 38 high school students a 4-hour workshop on shooting incident reconstruction, bloodstain pattern examination, and latent prints and crime scene mapping. But what I was getting to was breaking it down to the scientific principle that helps to combat crime. The physics, the math, the biology of it all. And these kids were brilliant. That's why I love talking to kids, is because they're not as jaded as some of the cops I talk to and some of the investigators I talk to. They truly do get this gleam in the eye when you start talking about something, and they follow along. Even when you start throwing mathematical formulas of calculating angles of impacts and area of origins, they're totally into it because they know it's used to figure out what happened within a crime. That is the key reason why I do this, is because that future right there is what's going to help resolve this problem. Help us figure out how to combat the crime with the best scientific practices available. Well, that episode took quite a deep and philosophical turn. Anyways, that's it for this episode. I know we don't have a highlight or an interview this week, but it's because I'm currently sitting in a closet myself, because we have just recently moved our office as of this week, and this is the first episode we're recording from our new location. So here's to the next episode. It's going to be great. You should totally tune in and listen. Remember, go to our website, forensicgeek.science. Email me. I'd love to hear from you. Who would you like to hear me interview? That's my question for the day. Anyways, I'm Detective Zack Foxen. Remember, keep learning.